In our very first episode a couple weeks ago, I went over the basic overall plan, the plan of attack, if you will, on how we're going to accomplish this thing. And then in our last video, I programmed the avionics, made sure all the controls work so we're not wasting our time. And I did see that some of you have commented, Kevin, why don't you use like a different kind of battery, a smaller battery? And basically the reason why I'm using the hardware that I am is because it's what's available. I don't know if it's because of Corona or just I don't know what I'm doing, but the transmitter and receiver and the battery charger were all issues that I had to make sure were compatible with one another. So I had to find a transmitter that worked with a receiver. I got that. And then I had to find a battery that would plug into the receiver. And I found one. It happened to be the bigger, bulkier one, but it works. But the hardest part was finding a battery charger that was compatible with the battery, a rechargeable battery that went with the receiver. And even the one that I bought, which was good for 6 volt, didn't really have the connectors match up perfectly. And that was the really hard part, finding connectors with the battery connector and the charger connector that actually mated correctly. And I actually had to kind of chisel away a little bit at that plastic connector to make sure it fit with the charger's connector. And then once I made sure that the battery's connector mated with the charger cable was still bought separately because it didn't come with the actual charger itself. It came with a whole bunch of different other charging cables, but not the one I needed. So I ordered it separately, which was a pain in the butt to find. And obviously, like I was just saying, it wasn't even a perfect match. I had to cut the wires that came with the charger, and then I had to splice in the new charger's port into those cables. Just using some wire cutters and then using a terminal connector to connect the two together. And these were like a waterproof variant kind of variety that I never used before. It was pretty sweet. I just took a heat gun and melted the connector, and it made it a really stable, solid connection. It was really nice. I guess if I ever drop my wires in a puddle or something, I'll be A-okay. All right, moment of truth. Let's see if I know what I'm doing. Oh, it's charging! But anyway, let's get on to what the substance of this week's video was supposed to be about, and that is carving out the Skydiver's wooden body. This is the place where all the electronics are gonna go. This includes the arms that are gonna steer the parachute once it opens and inflates. And it all started with this, a solid 1 pound block of basswood. Basswood's a little bit denser than balsa wood. So this block was to be used for the trunk of the body where all the electronics are going to be stored. That includes the battery and the servos and the receiver. But the block was too big. Remember, we're dealing with a weight issue, so we want to make it as light as possible, but still workable, still feasible for what we're trying to accomplish. So the first thing I did was basically saw this thing into half, a little more than half. I used about, I'd say close to 75% of this block. And I used a handsaw, not realizing or remembering that I have a perfectly good table saw downstairs. So I'm doing it the hard way. And here I am trying to chisel off the excess because I didn't cut it straight. So starting off real well, obviously. And of course, sanding it. This whole part of the project took me 6 days to do. And every single day I was completely caked in sawdust. So once I got my basic block carved out, now it was time to carve out a place to connect the legs. So if you think of like a G.I. Joe or a Barbie doll or something, we're in the crotch area where the legs connect, that's basically what I'm trying to chisel out here. You could have always just glued one of these squares into the middle of the block there at the end, but I wanted it to be I was always aiming to make it a solid piece of wood. All right, if it's connected naturally through its own means, then it just makes it harder to break. And this right here is what it looked like when everything was finished, with that part at least. And next came drilling holes for the screw inserts, and I wanted to do this before I started really carving into this block because it's at its strongest point right now, and I didn't want to risk splitting the wood after I cut out the center. And so I have 4 holes drilled in the front, 4 in the back, and 2 bigger ones on the side toward the top, and that's where I'll insert the arms later on. And next came the really tedious part, hollowing out this block so I can make room for the avionics. Now originally my plan again was to just hollow it out and keep the backing to the block to make it a more solid piece of wood, harder to break. But as I neared completion, I kind of figured I might as well just hollow this thing out completely and make a second cover for the back panel as well. And eventually I ended up realizing that it was a good thing I was doing it this way, because eventually I'd want to remove that back panel with the avionics mounts installed on it so I could get to it easier. It'd also make it easier to measure out those innard parts as well, which ended up proving out to be a really big challenge actually. So after that was all done, next came inserting the screw inserts. And I decided to install these because I didn't want the screws to strip the wood after repeatedly unscrewing the panels, because you're going to have to in order to charge the battery up. And the way I did this is I just screwed in a tiny M2 screw into the screw insert, and then I screwed the insert in all the way with some super glue around it to really secure it in place. And then I just unscrewed the screw so it wouldn't get glued in there with the insert. And next I made the panels, the front and back panels, and that ended up being a pretty big challenge as well, because you have to get those measurements exactly right in order for those holes to line up with the screw inserts. So with the main trunk container completed, now came building the mounts to kind of compartmentalize that area so I can attach these servos. And I did it by starting off with this 1" by 6" long piece of basswood. Same kind of block I'll be using soon for the arms and legs. So basically this mount piece that goes in the chest of the Skydiver that's used to mount these servos are made of 3 different parts that I had to painstakingly measure out and then glue together and secure with wood glue and super glue just for good measure. It doesn't look like much, but it actually took me a day and a half to make just this part. It took an incredible amount of sanding to perfection to get these measurements right, so this piece could insert easily into the body of the Skydiver. Because again, I want to be able to remove that back panel with those mounts included so I can easily switch out servos if needed in the future, say one goes bad. And the block you see in the middle there with the little groove in it, that's for a 1.5 grand servo that will allow me to release him from the drone mount. So if you remember back, that one block of original basswood before it was carved out weighed just over a pound, and now it only weighs 3.7 ounces. So we basically managed to cut 75% of its weight, which is just fantastic. So next up is carving out the arms. And again, to use that, I used a 6" block of basswood, cut it basically in half, only the upper arm is a little bit longer than the forearm or lower arm, and got to work. And this is what an upper arm actually looks like. There's a before and after picture. The groove there you see on the left is basically like the elbow part, the inner elbow, and the part on the right is more of the shoulder joint, which you can see more easily right here actually. So this is with them complete, however they're not yet secured. This took me about 2 days to do, about a day for each arm. And I kind of made it up as I went along, to be honest. I didn't really know how I was going to connect the two together until I was basically halfway through doing it. So to make the elbow joint and the shoulder joint, actually, I used one of these little steel hinge pieces. Not sure exactly what they're called or what they're used for. I found them online and I was like, hey, these would work just great for the purpose that I'm trying to achieve here. So I started with the forearm and dabbed a little super glue in the little hole I drilled in there. And same for the upper arm joint, and voila, connected. Now you can see there's still a little bit of play to it, a little bit of motion that's still created, but I don't want that because I want my turns to be precise when I need to turn the Skydiver under canopy. So I went ahead and filled those joints with, again, first super glue, and then for good measure I used wood glue to make it a little bit more appealing, I guess, for lack of a better word, and structural support. So here are the 2 arms completed, let them dry overnight, and I'm really happy with how they turned out actually. Kind of like a marionette or something. And then the next thing was inserting those hinge pins again, but this time into the end of the arm where the shoulder basically is. And those will be installed after we do the legs. By this time I was getting more comfortable with carving because, I'm not a professional by any means. The most carving experience I have is just making nose cones for rockets out of balsa wood. But I'm very happy with how all this turned out, and I didn't make any mistakes. I never had to restart on a piece. So again, inserting these steel hinges into the top of the lower leg where the knee goes, and then drilled a hole to the lower end of the upper leg, I guess at the end of the femur bone, I guess that's what it would be, and connected them together. And yes, his leg is bowed. I meant to do that. That's how skydivers look when they fall belly down. And I secured them with glue in the same manner that I did to the elbows of the arms, and just letting them dry here, but have them kind of laid out so you can see what they're kind of look like once they're installed. Only the legs will be spread apart a little bit more. And next was a really tricky part, connecting these legs to the bottom of that main trunk there where we already carved out the little crotch area. So in order to get these two legs symmetrical and connected at the right angle to this main body, I had to drill two holes, one in the top of the leg and one in the crotch area itself. And these holes had to line up perfectly. So to kind of judge where those holes would line up at, I stuck a cut part of a paper clip into each end and inserted them so they would make little divots where I knew I had to drill. And as I bored holes into each, I had to make sure I kept my drill at an appropriate angle of attack. But anyway, this is what it looks like after the leg is inserted, but not yet glued. And again, it has a little bit of give to it, which we don't want. So I glued those down, and this is what the finished thing looks like with two legs and no arms and no head. Kind of creepy. But anyway, once I got the legs and arms attached, the legs don't move, arms are able to hinge because that's how we're going to control the parachute once it's under canopy. Next came the head. And by this point, I was kind of running out of wood, so I took what I had left over, which were 3 pieces, and glued them together, let them dry overnight before I started cutting. He's a blockhead. And after about a day of carving and shaping, this is what I ended up with. But this thing still was a little too heavy, so I decided to bore through it and hollow it out. And next up came attaching the head and the neck to the body itself. And so I kind of traced an outline of where the head was going to go after I measured out the perfect center for it. Then I started carving out the area, and this is what it looks like. And I did this that way I could insert the head a little bit into the body, and therefore there'd be more support when I glue it in, instead of just gluing the neck right onto a flat surface of the body. Then we attached the head to the body, and this is it, all completed. Obviously lacking that front panel there that I have off at the moment so you can see the entire thing. This whole thing right here took me just under a week of pretty hard labor to do. I was caked in sawdust for an uncomfortable amount of time. And the best part is this whole thing, covers and all, only weigh about 12 ounces right now. Of course, there will be more weight once we add the battery and all the avionics to it and the parachute, but I'm kind of speculating this thing won't get over 1.5 pounds, which is perfect. Yay! So there you have it, guys. This completes today's episode. Say bye, Mr. Skydiver Man. Bye. Or is that hi? I don't know. I'm actually pretty proud of this thing. It was quite difficult to make, and I'm no Jesus. I'm no experienced carpenter. In our next episode, we're going to start on the parachute, ram air style. I've only made one of these before in my past. It was in my early college years just for fun, because we're all used to the round parachutes. Those are easy to make, round parachutes for model rockets or whatever, but this is a ram air square parachute or rectangular parachute with cells and everything. It's going to be a challenge, but it's doable, and we're going to get it done. Until that time, guys, Godspeed.